Definitely slow clap. I think that's definitely the answer. Every single one of us has a visceral reaction when we hear the phrase, hey, we need to talk. It just creates something inside of us. So if it creates something inside of us, how do we handle those tough conversations that are just too big to overlook? That's what we're going to talk about today as we dive into part 2 of staying connected when you clash. Now, for me, that visceral reaction probably comes to the way those things were handled in my family growing up. Those difficult conversations, they usually happened at dinner time around the dinner table. And it would be partway in, because you could tell that there was tension around the table. You could tell that somebody was frustrated, angry. And then about 3/4 of the way into the meal, you'd only have a little bit of food left on your plate, and it would come to the surface, and somebody would bring it up. And so as a kid, I'm chasing around that one piece of broccoli on my plate, fascinated with its design, because I'm not going to look up at the angry faces around the table. And soon after the conversation, it's unfolded for a little while, and you recognize I'm not going to be able to nurse this one piece of broccoli for the entire conversation. I would turn and I would look at the plant stand that was to my left. And we had one of those ceiling to floor like tension stands that had all sorts of plants hung on it in their macrame little holders that would dangle down. And I would become fascinated with the vine that poured out of one of those plants. And that's what I would stare at the entire time that this angry, difficult conversation was unfolding. So the phrase, we need to talk, it causes a reaction in me. And I would guess it causes a reaction in you as well. And the reaction can go kind of one of two ways. For some of us, we wince. We wince because that reaction or that scenario is so unnerving to us. And so we become silent when somebody goes, hey, we need to talk, and we just sit there silent. In fact, we won't start that conversation even though we know we need to talk. We're just silent. We're stoic. And maybe if somebody says, hey, we need to talk, and they start unpacking, we start apologizing right out of the gate. You're right, I'm sorry, let's, okay, it's over, good. And that's our approach. We wince when we need to talk. And for other people, they respond by winding up. We need to talk. Oh, we need to talk, do we? Okay, well, why don't you bring it? What do you have? What do you think? What are you going to say to me? Because I'm ready. I'm going to litigate everything that you're saying. I'm going to prove to you why what you're saying is wrong. I'm going to fire back point for point. I'm going to attack everything that bothers me about you, your approach, your words, your look, your tone. Here we go. And whether our tendency is for fight or flight or freeze, how do we fix it when we can't overlook it? You see, in part 1 of this series, which if you missed, you can go back and pick up. You can find it at messages.lakeoconee.church. But in part 1, we explored Peter's writing, where he said, above all, love each other deeply, because that kind of love, it covers over, it smothers like a fire blanket a multitude of wrongs, a multitude of sins. And so what we concluded last week was we must love big to stifle small tensions. We've got to love big, and we can stifle some of those small tensions, the things that are just differences between us and them. Our wiring is a little different. Our approach is a little different. The way we load the dishwasher is just a little different. If we love big, We can stifle those small tensions. But it leaves us with a compelling question. What is too big to overlook? What's too big for us to overlook? And depending which of those two groups of people we fall into, when faced with conflict, we respond in different ways. We would answer this question in different ways. For some of us, we might wince. For others of us, we wind up. If we wince, the answer to this question is, well, nothing is too big to overlook, because I don't want to have a hard conversation. So if I can overlook it, yeah, it's monumental, but I'm just going to pretend like I didn't see it. I'm going to pretend like it didn't happen. I'm going to pretend like it didn't bother me, because nothing's too big to overlook. Because we need to talk just causes me to wince, to go silent, to become stoic, to freeze. But if my approach is to wind up, I'll take conflict. Let's step into conflict. We're going to have this. We'll talk about it right now. Then everything's too big to overlook. I didn't like the color shirt you wore today. Let's have a conversation about that. Because I can wind up about that. I can give you reasons that that's not a wise choice. Now, the reality is that the answer probably lies somewhere in between. We can't talk about everything. We shouldn't talk about everything. But we also can't talk about nothing. There are things big enough to bring up and address. So perhaps this list might help us to know what is big enough to address. First, we address repeated behavior. Repeated behavior or patterns of behavior that we see playing out over and over and over. This happens frequently. It happens consistently. We wouldn't bring up the one-time things or the accidental mistakes. There's no point in pointing out, hey, you failed, FYI. Everybody knows, especially the person who failed. But when it's repeated behavior, when it's a pattern of behavior, that's probably something that merits a conversation, because there's ongoing frustration. There's ongoing pain. There's ongoing damage to the relationship. For an example, there's a work associate that you're responsible for, and you see them consistently not pulling their weight. That's repeated behavior. It's not one time, it's not accidental, it's ongoing. Well, that warrants a conversation to restore that person, to restore that relationship. So repeated behavior or a pattern of behavior. If it's violating core values and clear boundaries, then it merits a conversation. But not if it's merely a peripheral issue, it doesn't matter that much, or even a personal preference, like the shirt I described. But if it's core values and clear boundaries that are being violated, then that merits a conversation. This would be matters of honesty, of respect, of commitment. Things that have damaged trust or safety. Things that impact the openness and the closeness of that relationship. For example, if you're in a small group, and one of the tenets of that small group is that what is shared in the group is kept in the group. And then you find out that one of the small group members has gone and shared your prayer request, that you really didn't want people to know all your business, and now they've shared that with some other people. That merits a conversation because it's impacted the openness and the closeness of your relationship to that person and even the group as a whole. Things that are status changing as opposed to things that are personally annoying. There are things that annoy you, there are things that annoy me, but at the end of the day, we see those things and we go, hey, they made a choice, bad choice, wrong choice maybe, but they just annoy me. But then there are other things that are status changing, when all of a sudden someone who was a close friend becomes a distant acquaintance. Because of what they did, we moved them into a different category. And that person that we used to do lunch with, now we duck their phone calls. We always have another reason that we're unavailable because the status changed, but we never had a conversation. A conversation is merited. And it's merited when we can approach that conversation with the goal of understanding, the goal of healing. It's not a good time to have a conversation when our goal is venting, when our goal is, gotcha, I proved you were wrong. That's not a good time for a conversation. So what warrants a conversation? Repeated behavior, a pattern of behavior, a violation of core boundaries or core values or clear boundaries. When the status has changed in our relationship and when we have a goal of understanding and of healing. When we can say our emotions are calm rather than my feelings are so raw right now. I'm so angry. I'm so hurt. But instead, we're in a place where we can say, I am capable of hearing the other side of the story rather than merely unloading the speech that I've rehearsed so many times in the car by myself before I got to you. You see, at home, we can sit down and go, hey, this keeps happening. But here's how it makes me feel, and I wanted to bring it to you. At work, hey, this happened last week, and it violates our principle of, so we needed to talk about this. Between friends and teammates and group members, hey, this came up, and it felt too big to ignore because I value this relationship. But in order for this grid to work, we have to be committed to fighting fair. We have to fight fair. Now, think about it. All of us have something in common. We don't like something that's rigged. We don't like something that's rigged. As kids, we discover that pretty early on when we go to the amusement park or the carnival and we step up to play the games in order to earn the tickets so that we can gather the prize. And we step up and we're stunned to discover that the basketball hoop that we're aiming at is maybe a little bit smaller and maybe a little more oval than the one that we practiced on in the yard. That the basketball that they've given us is just a little more inflated than we're used to, so it bounces a little bit wilder, and we can't quite win the prize we thought for sure we had it in the bag. We don't like something that's rigged, which is why as adults, we react when we read a news story like the one that came out a couple of years ago about Jonte Porter, the former Toronto Raptors player who was banned for life from the NBA because he admitted that he had been purposefully underperforming during a basketball game in order to repay some of his debts. And while you might be able to understand why someone would do that, nobody likes something that's rigged. And that conversation that starts with, we need to talk, it kind of feels rigged, especially to the person that's getting talked to. So today, I want to share three principles that are drawn from the teaching of Jesus and his closest followers. Teachings that can be used by any of us, regardless of whether we would consider ourselves to be especially spiritual or religious or church-going, whether this is your first Sunday in the room, an awkward, unusual Sunday that brought you to the room, or whether this is a room that you come to Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. And whether you're a regular or this is a fluke, these principles are something that you can give a go. And the first is recorded by Matthew. And here's why that's fascinating. Because Matthew is one of 12 of Jesus' closest followers. But as Matthew is following Jesus, we described last week how different those followers were and the tension that had to arise between all of those followers. So he was part of this very diverse group of 12, but he was probably the one that could easily be despised by everyone else in the group. He certainly was despised by Simon the Zealot. He was despised by Simon ideologically because Simon was determined to kill any of the Romans that were occupying his country. For everyone else, they despised Matthew practically because Matthew had decided to be a tax collector, which meant he had aligned with the Roman occupiers. And so Simon was mad because he aligned with the Romans. Everybody else was mad because as a tax collector, he routinely stole money from other people. He overcharged other people, maybe even some of them. And so because they'd all experienced this from someone, maybe even Matthew, it would have been very easy for all of them to despise Matthew. But Matthew, now as a Jesus follower, a former tax collector, he shares something that for some of us will recognize as the Sermon on the Mount, teaching that Jesus shared in which he highlighted how the Jewish people were very, very familiar with the sacred rituals that made up their laws. But Jesus challenged them to put people over those religious practices. He said it like this: "You have heard it that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.'" Now, I recognize you're probably thinking, whoa, I thought we were talking about tension. That escalated quickly. No, but for Jesus, he saw a connection. He says, "But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment." You're fixated over here and you go, "I haven't killed anybody yet. I think I'm doing good." And Jesus says, yeah, but what about if you're angry? What if you're hateful? What if you have allowed something to mushroom so big between you and this other person? Jesus says that they kind of equate. Jesus went on to give some very practical examples that made sense in his day. And if he were speaking to us, he would say something like, if you have given somebody else a label, you've called them a name, well, they're just and you've got a name, a term, a label, a category for people like that. If you've got anybody like that in your life, or maybe you've got a group of people that honestly, you've cursed them under your breath. Those kind of people, that's what Jesus is talking about here. When he says, if you're angry towards a brother or sister, you don't have to have killed them, but if you've already grouped them, then there's something festering there. You'll give an account, Jesus says. So here's what he challenges us to do. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, and then come and offer your gift. If you and I are heading to church, and on the way here, we're driving on 44 and we go, hey, wait a second, there's that relationship. And I know that they're hurt. I know that they're frustrated. I know I've done something to them and they're well aware. If you remember an offense, go fix the offense. Skip church that day. Go fix the relationship. Because reconciliation outweighs religion. And the first principle of fighting fair that we learn is fight to get there first. Fight to get there first. Now, usually we race to be right, but Jesus challenges us race to restore the relationship. As the offender, race to restore the relationship. And as the offendee, Jesus says, race to restore the relationship as well. If you wronged, then you go. And if you were wronged, you go. Ideally, both of us are racing to find the other in order to rebuild what's been broken. But typically, you and I, we tend to look at this and we find an excuse on both sides of the coin to sit and fester rather than going first. Later, Matthew, as he's unpacking this a little further, he says this: if your brother or sister, they sin against you. So earlier it was, if you know that your brother or sister's been offended, you go and try to fix it. Here he says, if your brother or sister sins against you, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. And if they listen to you, you have gained them back. This is obvious from the text as Matthew writes Jesus' teaching, that it's sin against you. This isn't random. If you think your brother or sister did the wrong thing, if you think your brother or sister was speeding when you passed them on the highway, go and confront. That's not how it's written. But this is an idea of, hey, if somebody has wronged you, not something random, you have two choices. Last week we learned we can let it go. So we either let it go or we must go. Those are our options. We go, we have a conversation, and the goal is to restore the relationship. We've gained them back. This is not a fight to speak our minds. We're fighting for the relationship. That's principle 2. This is not a fight to put them in their place. This is not a fight to tell them what for. But this is a fight to restore. Jesus goes on in this passage and he unpacks it. I won't spend time today, but he unpacks it. Go one-to-one and then bring a mediator. If they're not hearing you, bring a mediator along, because it's quite possible that mediator will go, hey, dude, you're off base here. You're confronting them over something that's really not a big deal. If you still can't restore the relationship, involve a spiritual leader in trying to rebuild what's been broken. So what does this look like practically to fight for the relationship? What does it look like to go and to have this conversation? It's not us barging in the door and going, I caught you, you did the wrong thing, you hurt me. Instead, this is our opportunity to go, hey, I value this relationship. And when this happened, here's what it felt like on my side. That begins a conversation. You matter enough to me that I wanted to come talk it out because I didn't want to leave it here. Now, if you're ever on the receiving end of that conversation, and there's anything at all in there that's more than just opinion or preference, then the only right response in that moment is, wow, I'm really sorry. Not, I'm sorry you feel that way. Not, well, I'm sorry if that's how you took it. Not, I'm sorry, but, and then we give a 14-paragraph explanation. It's just, wow, I'm sorry. I really didn't mean for that to land that way. I really didn't know that I came across that way. I really shouldn't have treated you like that. Wow, I see how I really could have done better in that situation. Now, as we go and talk to people, they may not have heard this conversation. So as someone apologizes to you and they don't do it right, you've got to have exceptional grace. You cannot walk out and go, well, they said the words, but I don't think the way that we all interpret it. Have exceptional grace when anybody tries to acknowledge, gosh, I think I hear you. But at the same time, we have to have incredible empathy when someone comes to us. To go, how would I want to hear this back if I was the one who was hurt? And instead of defending, staking out our territory, what if we attempt to rebuild the relationship? At the same time, when somebody does cobble together an apology of sorts, this is not our opportunity to go, well, I'm glad you said sorry, but sorry doesn't fix it. It's not our chance to come back at them. But instead, it's our opportunity to go, I really do appreciate that you said that. It means a lot to me that you would acknowledge that. And dare I guess that most of the time that there's a breakdown in a relationship, it's not 100% on the other person, which means there's probably opportunity for us to go, gosh, I'm sorry too. I could have, and lean in. Acknowledge you're as human as the person that you're talking to. And somewhere in that conversation, we've got to move towards restoration. If I've wronged someone, the right response is, how do I make this better? How do I restore your trust? And somewhere, eventually, will you forgive me? And we know that that's where the conversation heads, because as Jesus is teaching and he says, hey, I want you to go between the two of you and you've got to have this conversation and talk it out. Peter's response to Jesus' teaching, Peter comes to Jesus and he goes, hey, Lord, so how many times when I have this conversation, how many times do I forgive my brother or my sister who sins against me? Up to maybe 7 times? And Peter thinks he's being generous. We had the conversation. It should have been fixed. Everything's better now. Oh, they did it again. Well, we should cut them off. Peter says, no, let's go to 7 conversations. And Jesus responds, and he says, no, it's not 7 times, but 77 times. And what Jesus does here is he goes not to a tally board full of hash marks, but he goes to our heart, to our attitude, to our posture. And it's depicted so well in the writing of the Jesus follower named Paul as he sends a letter to the Ephesian gathering of believers some 30 years after this conversation. And he phrases it this way. He says, be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. This is very similar to the writing of Peter that we explored last week. But he elaborates, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. And he continues. He says, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become, in every aspect, the mature body of him who is the head. That is Christ. Now, for a lot of us, we hone in on just this first phrase, speaking the truth. And we go, oh yeah, that's me. I'm a truth teller. I say it like I see it. And inadvertently, we get into these tough conversations and we are more likely to burn the person than we are to burn the problem. Now, I recognize how crazy difficult this is. Because for me, I have sat in my car and I have contemplated those conversations on both sides of the coin, when I've been wronged and when I am the wronger. And I've grappled with my words, with my emotions, with my pride. But the only way to have those conversations is to do it in love. It is the only motivation to fight. And Paul continues in this chapter and he says, don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, not mine, that it may benefit the person that's listening, the person that I'm talking to. You see, Paul leaves no question about our motivation when we lean into these difficult conversations. We have to fight fair. And that means not only do we need to fight to get there first and fight for the relationship, but we need to fight the problem, not the person. I get it. This is complex. And there are some very complex situations in which you may need a mediator, you may need a counselor, you may need to create new boundaries, but you can't overlook it. We have to fight fair. As people, it's the only way to continue moving forward. But let me speak to the Jesus followers among us for just a minute. Because if we call ourselves believers, imagine if we get this right. If we battle for the relationship, instead of shutting people out, cutting people off, rotating people through, imagine the harmony that we could create at our homes, in our businesses, in our church. Imagine the example that we could provide. Because battling for the relationship is exactly what our Heavenly Father did for us. And that's a message that we can model. We can model it in real time because we cannot talk about a God who restores while we refuse to restore. Instead, our church could be a showroom of mended relationships, friendships and marriages and families, serve teams and small groups, work associates. This is hard. This is complicated. This is work. But there is a cheat code that makes it easier. And that's what we're going to talk about next week in part 3 of staying connected when you clash. Can I pray for you? Dear God, it's way easier to put a list on a board than it is to navigate the tensions with real people. God, they're hard, they're messy, it's difficult, it's frustrating, it's heart-wrenching. God, I pray right now for the people that you are bringing to our mind. Some of us, we've got people to go back to. Some of us are saddened because there are relationships that have eroded that we're not even sure why. God, give us wisdom to know what to do with what you're doing in our hearts. Give us wisdom to know how to live this out. For some of us, the hurt is so big, and the offense is so massive that there's more conversations to be had before we can move. God, I pray that you would give us guidance, give us comfort, give us direction. But in the day-to-day, give us grace to restore the relationships around us rather than simply moving on from one to the next, to the next. And thank you. Thank you for not moving on from us. It's in the name of Jesus that we pray these things.